And welcome to Context and Clarity Live, where every week we bring to you a live conversation, that's why we call it live, with a special guest who has something to say about the things that matter most to you, the architect, no matter what your context is. And we have a wide range of guests. We have, over the course of 3 years now, we've had a wide range of guests that talk about everything from project management to invoicing to mindset to who knows what, maybe even leadership or pipeline. We might find out today. I am joined as usual by my co-host Katie Kangas. Welcome, Katie.
Good to be here. Thanks, Jeff.
It's great to have you here. We're in I'm in a different location today. We'll get into that in a minute, but I see over in our comments section there that Mark Arlo Page is joining us. Says happy Tuesday. My guest is Mark Carolina today. Welcome, Mark. And Scott Thrift is joining us from cloudy San Francisco. Welcome, Scott. Glad you are here with us today as well. So it's a couple people joining us from Facebook. Don't see anybody from LinkedIn or Twitch or Twitter yet, but if you're on Facebook right now and you're commenting away, maybe beat Mark into the room or Scott into the room, and your comments just aren't showing up, it's because you are in a private Facebook group. And there happen to be rules. As it turns out, there are rules in life. Facebook has their share. So go to chat.restream.io/FB, and a couple of clicks later, you can give Facebook permission to let your comments out, just like Mark and Scott have done. And if you said, hey, I've done that in the past, those expire at some point. I have no idea what the timing of that is, but they do expire. So try it again, chat.restream.io/FB. And that'll solve all the problems that you have in the world. We promise. So give that a shot. Let's see. Let me pop over here really quickly. So, like I said, Katie's in her normal spot. Welcome back from Minnesota, Katie. Glad you're here from Minnesota. I'm in Atlanta today, which sunny Atlanta, not hot, but it's warmer than Indianapolis. I'm here because we're kicking off Shadow Summit tomorrow, which is a gathering of leaders from the AEC industry that are sort of the change makers, I guess, in terms of innovation and the direction of how we design and develop and build things. So it's going to be some fun here the next couple of days here in Atlanta. And our guest today is he's tipping us towards the right side. Is that right? The right side, the east side of the country. So it's good that Scott is balancing us out on the West Coast there. We had a great conversation last week with Andrew McConnell on mindset. And just kind of thinking back through some of the guests that we've had so far in this fall season of Context and Clarity Live, a lot of really great conversations, mindset, leadership, different business models for architecture. And I'm glad that we're going to sort of keep this trend going about really, I think, focusing on the future of practice and the future of the profession. So we'll jump into that in just a minute. Mark Enns is joining us. Hi, Mark, from he says, so there's a blue sky in OC in California, but it's cloudy in San Francisco. That actually seems normal to me, I guess. That sounds about right. So welcome, Mark. Glad you're here as well, and everybody else that's joining us. Katie, I feel like I'm forgetting something. What am I, if anything, what am I forgetting?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I don't know any way to prepare people for the conversation that's about to happen. You two in the green room. It's a force to be reckoned with. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. Everybody give Katie some love because she didn't know what she was walking into here today. I've known our guest I'll introduce him here for just a minute. I've known him for quite a while. I'm sure we'll get into some of that right now, but this is going to be a fun conversation today. I'll just leave it at that. And sorry, Katie.
I'm here for the ride.
Yeah, hang on. This is going to be fun. Let me just introduce our guest. He is a leadership and mentorship expert. He recognizes that the pipeline to the profession of architecture might be broken or at least leaking, maybe. He's a member of the AIA College of Fellows. I figured it was safer to say it that way. He's a co-founder of the Christopher Kelley Leadership Development Program and a senior associate at Quinn Evans. Ryan McEnroe, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Katie. Happy to be here.
Good to see you.
Glad that you're here. Glad that you're here. And we'll give Katie this too far off the rails. So Katie, you don't know this, but Ryan and I met, I don't know how many years ago now, because I was in charge of bringing leadership development, whatever that meant, to AIA Indiana. I did a lot of searching, came across Christopher Kelley Leadership Development Program, which, as I mentioned in the intro, Ryan is one of the co-founders of, and eventually we implemented CKLDP. It's a little bit shorter way of saying it, but not that much easier way of saying it. We implemented that in Indiana, and I'm happy to say, I'm, the Christopher Kelley Leadership Development Program is a great program. I saw it sort of as, in a way, coming from my charge and my point of view, sort of as leadership development, architecture, leadership, and development in a box, because they have created this system, they systematized leadership development in a fantastic way that allowed it to propagate across the country. And I'm sure Ryan will speak to where all CKLDP is being implemented now, but it's spreading across the country. It's very successful in Indiana, where I usually today. But so first of all, thanks, Ryan. It's great to meet you all those years ago, and great to work with you across all these years to bring more and better leadership development to the less experienced, I'll say, in our. Thanks for being here. Thanks for CKLDP, and I'm looking forward to jumping into a wild and woolly ride here today.
Great. Well, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were in the green room, or before we got started, as Katie said, about the fact, and this is personal to me too, because I dabble in educating undergrads and graduate students, but we talked about the fact that there's a pipeline problem, a pipeline to the profession problem, and you brought up this idea of sort of non-traditional routes. What should we start with? What did the traditional route to architecture? What did it used to be before we even talk about what it is now, or if there's even a way to wrangle what it is now?
Sure. So, I think AIA, NCARB, the NAB, they all kind of talk about, well, the traditional path towards architecture. I've been involved in this as volunteers and leaders in each of those organizations, and I've kind of said, well, the traditional route is, you get your degree, whether it's a 5-year BArch or a 4+2 traditional undergrad and master's degree, and you come out and you get your license in due time. Let's not let it linger. And with that, I think that starts to define the traditional path towards architecture. And you say that somebody coming out of high school knows that they want to be an architect. Let's start there.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, as we were talking beforehand, I mean, Katie has a story about her experience with architecture. You have one. I mean, my story is very similar to theirs, but I don't think I met an architect before I went to architecture school. I was familiar with Mike Brady. I don't know what else, but I did have the advantage, so to speak, of living sort of the second half up after my dad was transferred to Chicago. I was surrounded by Frank Lloyd Wright, and I had a mom have a mom that's a lifelong learner, and she took us to all of the things, but all of the Frank Lloyd Wright properties. I guess Frank Lloyd Wright design huge influence on me, but a lot of people are not exposed to architecture, maybe with a big A. Not an architect as a professional. So how do we even get there? How are we inspired to get into that pipeline, I guess, as we're calling it at this point?
Yeah. And so I'll comment here. I'll paraphrase because I'm sure she said it a lot better than I did. But Michelle Obama, right after Barack's term had come to a conclusion, it was that following summer at conference, at the AIA conference, Michelle Obama was a speaker. And the one piece that really struck a chord with me was, how do you know you want to be an architect if you've never known one?
Mm-hmm.
And she was specifically speaking to the Black community and those underserved and how they don't even know it exists as a profession. And then you lump in engineering and construction. It's the whole AEC, but specifically architecture. Like, how do you know you want to be one if you don't know anybody? My aunt, my
Mm-hmm.
uncle, my cousin, nobody in my family. How am I supposed to know that that's what I want to be? And that is certainly a particular layer of the profession that uh, from a diversity standpoint that I think has a lot of attention, rightly so. We've been serving, I think the industry, Noma knows the numbers really well, but I think for the past 50 years, it's been 2% of licensed architects are people of color, which is just like, how has that not changed?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the profession, myself included, it's like that's not a representation of our society. And I think that's why there's so much urge to change it for the better
Yeah.
so that we actually represent the people, the clients, the communities that we have in our society. So it's not there's no magic number out there. I think the magic number is that you as a firm should be practicing and look like the society in which you serve. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're a small shop in, you know, the Dakotas, then that's one look. And if you're a big firm in New York City, that's another look. But I think the point is that there's the the correct mix of people in the profession that are actually working and serving society. And this gets to pipeline, so it gets to understanding as a high school student or before that this is what I want to do the rest of my life. I think that the AIA and NCARB and NAB, specifically ACSA for that matter, we can group them in as well. NOMA, they've done a really good job addressing students once they're in the profession, once they're in a NAB accredited program, uh, in giving them support and finding barriers towards licensure. And there's a lot of, we're going to need more hours. There's a lot of challenges with that too. But that's at least, I feel like that's at least been addressed firm by firm, region by region. We're starting to see better progress there. The pipeline, however, really hasn't been addressed. I think there's been a lot of talk about we as a profession need to get into K through 12, and we need to inform K through 12 on what the profession is. And there's great programs, the ACE mentorship program, architecture, construction, engineering mentorship program. There's architecture in the schools, some name a different spin-off of it. It's what we have here in Washington, D.C. through the AIA or some other nonprofit that gets architects into the curriculum 3, 4, 5 times a semester. It's Tuesdays, every other Tuesday with the architect or something of that nature. And you run a class, and it's third grade and fourth grade and sixth grade and into the high school classes to just do fun, creative craft exercises with them, but letting them know that architecture even exists.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great step. And I commend the volunteers that do that work. I don't think it's enough. The problem is that it's just too few and far in between. So, and this isn't just about ethnic diversity. I think this goes beyond. It gets into gender and religion and age, experience. When you look at diversity of our society, it's more than just the color of one's skin. And so, and my experience, I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. My dad's a farmer, my mom's a teacher. I got 4 brothers. We knew how to work. We were farm grown, dairy farm turned into an organic farm. That was our desire. That's what we knew what to do, was just to work. And when I said I wanted to be an architect, it kind of hit my parents a little out of left field. Like, where the heck's this coming from? Well, it came from a mentor. And who was that mentor? That mentor was John Roccanova, my high school shop teacher. We were in such a small school. This is rural upstate New York, such a small public school that, high school was also middle school. It was all together.
Mm.
And so I had the same shop teacher from 7 through 12. I think you only have to take 2 shop classes from a requirement at the time anyhow. I had him every semester. We just connected. And he didn't connect with everybody. He'll admit that. But from a mentorship standpoint, we were able to connect. So I found the profession through the act of building and modeling and craft and the mortise and tenon joint. And once a plan kind of came up into section and became three-dimensional, I was like, I'm in love. He didn't know one thing or another about the profession though. And so he just tried to make connections. He tried to figure out like how to apply. You guys would laugh at my first portfolio. I mean, it was a joke for any kind of admissions into a NAV accredited degree, but it was the best I could do. Literally, my grandmother pronounced it architecture. She could not pronounce the profession. Like we had one architect in town that served the weekenders and those that could afford an addition. There was no reason to have more than one architect in town, and there was no reason to have staff for said architect. Like, and things have changed a little bit since then. But I mean, I'm trying to paint the picture here so that there's different levels of like finding the profession, right? And so that's how I found the profession. But I had no idea about accreditation. I had no idea about licensure. I had no idea about the financial strain that it would have. I had no idea about the financial opportunities that it would have. So there's I happen to find it, and I'm saying this as, predominant part of our culture as a white male. Like I happen to find it without too many roadblocks, but not in the smoothest path forward. I mean, my non-traditional path was to get an associate's degree, 2 years, transfer, get a bachelor's degree. Thanks, but you lose a year. Do I really want to go to grad school? Is this really what I want to do the rest of my life? Yes, I'm all in. Now I go to grad school. I had 9 years of professional education before it was all said and done.
Mm.
And so I found my path, and I'm really happy with the decisions I've made. And it's always easier to look back and say, what could I have done differently? But, one side of me says I wouldn't change anything because I would have never met Jeff. And what would I have done in my life if I'd never met Jeff? But another part of me is like,
valid question.
it's a very valid question. But another part of me is like, oh, if I could have just looked at the financials, I would have taken this path. Or if I could have just looked at, the career end goals and, how much money I might make, I may have taken a different path. And so I'm very thankful for the path that I have had, but I feel like being informed would have let me make some decisions instead of having them just fall in my plate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie, I know you mentioned that you had met maybe one architect before you went to grad school.
I did. So I was able to shadow the architect who was designing my uncle's house, which was a mansion. But my exposure actually came from my uncle and my papa, my grandpa, who built over 100 houses together. And being able to walk those houses, and Prevoke Woods was great in high school, and architectural drafting in high school was where it all fell together. I'm like, if I can hand draw for the rest of my life, that'd be great. And the architect I shadowed for a couple hours one day in 7th grade, she hand drew everything. And she had one other woman working for her who was her CAD, did AutoCAD. So it was so fun to walk a project with her. And then I was just set. I'm like, okay, I'll just do this. But yeah, you just get that idea in mind. But it's hard to imagine what barriers people face. So have you talked with folks about that, Ryan, about whether it is a long path? And along that path, I had 8 years of education because my mom was insistent that I would change my mind. So she's like, go get a liberal arts degree in art. And I chose art and art history because I saw a path through a local university to do a 3+ program. And so that was my slow and steady path, but I took slow steps towards it. And I imagined a lot of different careers along the way, but architecture was always where it's at.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of, how do you talk about that kind of visionary career choice, that you have to have that long vision? It's not going to pay off for a while, but if you're willing to put the legwork in, it's gonna be there for you.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the barriers that I think still is very much a part of the profession is licensure. And but before you even get to there is like getting into school and figuring out which school to go to. And I know that there's a lot of resources out there for that. Well, at least more. I'm aware of those resources now that I wasn't at the time. So
Right. Yeah.
any opportunity I get with a high school student, and we host a lot of students at Quinn Evans, both architecture students that are working towards internship and AXP hours, as well as just folks that are interested in the profession. And I'll take them aside. We'll go have coffee or a hot chocolate because they don't even like drink coffee yet, and we'll and we'll talk about just like, these are the things I wish I knew. I only got you for 60 minutes. These are the things I wish I knew. I wish I knew the difference in whether or not it mattered between an M-ARC and a B-ARC, and what is accreditation. Um, and I'll loosely put that in, if you're ever going to practice in academia, you should have an M-ARC. But if you really already know that you just want to be licensed, a B-ARC is more than enough. Like, you can go do that. It's not that one's better than the other. And I think maybe even like a decade or 20 years ago, like, it really was like frowned upon to have a B-ARC. But I don't know. I'm glad that it didn't like stick, because it's clear that there's a reason for it in the profession. You talk about, you know equity and just having more than one pathway. Like, that's a great opportunity to have more than one pathway. The other, of course, is licensure and the hurdles towards licensure, and whether or not a firm is going to support their staff in time off and paying for the exams and study material and just getting over that hurdle. um, you combine the two together and you got NCARB's IPAL program, right?
Mhm.
Where, even when schools are thinking about starting an accredited degree, like, where, I'll dabble with the volunteering with NAB, and I'm like, have you considered an IPAL program? I'm not saying IPAL is right for everybody, but if you're a program that's focused on graduating students that are ready to work in the profession, IPAL might be a pretty good a pretty good opportunity for the integrated path towards licensure. Um, and
Is that what IPAL stands for?
It is. IPAL is
Mhm.
Integrated Path Towards Architectural License.
Okay.
And NCARB's got a website for it. At this
This
point, I think it's probably been around for 6 or 7 years now.
the school I'm
Yeah.
doing a studio at this semester, they have that sort of program. They're one of
Yeah.
the
And
ones.
it's usually like one or two students, and it's not that every student that graduates from that program needs to go through the IPAL program. It's usually one or two
Mhm.
students a year,
Mhm.
um, at least the programs that I'm familiar with. Um, but it's kind of taken the co-op program that so many schools have had for a long time, where they integrate experience through their education, and it just formalizes it a little bit more
Mhm.
and has state approval so you can take your exams before you technically have your degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I teach at Ball State, and we have IPAL, and I don't, I'm not plugged in with IPAL. That's not part of my curriculum. How many students are actually enrolled in that program, but it is a relatively small number. There are some that are successful in, I shouldn't say it, it's not great marketing. There are some that are successful in graduating through that, but it's a
It's
lot, right? You're
it's
adding a
rigorous.
lot on top of it. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
I believe it's only our MArc students that are going through
Yeah.
Mm.
through IPAL, because you'd have to have, you know, relatively significant amount of experience in order to check all of the boxes, right?
Yeah.
To be able to do
And
that.
and so, I mean, like, this is my issue with IPAL. You got to know, 18, you're out of high school, I want to be an architect.
Mhm.
And so that you can start that process. And I think it's great for those that do know, but for those that don't know, it's just that much later that you're able to, finally
Mhm.
get engaged. And you think about, here's another the 3+ programs, or those non-traditional students that we all went to school with at this point, that went and got a bachelor's degree in something, anything, and then said, actually, no, I want to do architecture. And they come in to a master's program to get their MArch. And it's this intense, 3+ years of education. And they're as like sought after as anybody else in the profession at this point, because they're not just like pigeonholed into like, I am architect. It's like, no, there are people in society that we need to be designing for, right? Like, I am robot that can operate the Revit machine. Like they come to the profession in such a different perspective that I think is like critical to the success of the profession. And so again, it's a great opportunity. It's a great avenue for quote unquote non-traditional students, someone who isn't 18 and decides what they want to do with the rest of their life. I mean, I'd say it jokingly, but it's who the heck knows what they want to do when they're 18. So I think for programs to be able to offer that as an avenue towards licensure, because ultimately, first you got to have the degree and then towards licensure, and great if you can loop it all together with iPal. There's also, I think these programs also tend to support folks that have already been working. So even if they do have a accredited or they have a bachelor's degree in art, architecture, engineering, what have you, and they're just working, and then they're like, well, I got a family, I got income, I got debt, I still want to get my degree, but it's I feel like I'm late. And so here's an opportunity for those to still be part of the profession and be a meaningful part of the profession, to have a really good voice in the profession.
Towards the age gap, who's the oldest person you've known to go through and get their license? Just so people know when it's not too late.
The oldest person that I know, he probably got his license when he was 52.
Yeah.
Early 50s. Yeah. And so that, I don't know. I feel like he got his degree earlier on, and he just took a long time to get his license. Not unheard of. I think a lot of people are doing it in their 40s still. But NCARB just came out with some numbers. I just got like flooded with NCARB emails last week, but they were like emails I actually opened for a change. Don't tell NCARB. But they had a lot of their reports that they were commenting on, and one of the, I think it's common to hear that people kind of have biases towards folks that aren't passing their exams, and it's like, oh, what's taking them so long? But one of the big biases is actually for age and not having passed your exam. They, how they do all these surveys all the time, right? So they survey whoever answers them, but they came back with like a surprising fact that there's a big age bias, that if you're not licensed and you're past a certain age, I don't know what age it is, that there's a bias in the workforce, that, I don't know, you're not smart enough or capable or something. I mean, I know that there's people that are more than capable of doing my job that don't have their license.
There's award-winning architects in Minnesota who can never be licensed architects in this state because of what path they took towards licensure. And so some of them are trying to tell their story and bring awareness to that fact. But that's a state-by-state issue as well.
Yeah. Well, let's just blow it. That's a really interesting fact, Katie. And I know there are people in the entree architect community that, not in Minnesota, that have the exact same situation. And something you just said, Ryan, about someone that's older than you, that's or as talented, I forget exactly how you said it, but they're not licensed, but they could do your job. So here's a question. And as someone who teaches classes in the university and is a professional pot stirrer, I have people cringe at this statement a lot, or this question a lot. Does everyone in the profession, does everyone that goes to architecture school need to be licensed? As a profession,
sure,
and we can set this up. You walk into the doctor's office, right? That's the age-old argument,
Yep.
Does everybody need to be licensed?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm going to answer this twofold, because it's like,
Yeah.
in DC, it's always politics season. So as a true politician,
Yeah.
um,
As someone
I,
that's effed,
yeah,
go ahead.
so I feel like it's both, but this is why. So I do not feel that everyone who graduates from an architecture degree needs to be licensed.
Mhm.
I don't feel academics need to be licensed. I serve on more than enough NAB visits to know that that could be a bad thing if all academics are actually licensed. But
Sure. Yeah.
I and the degree, I think, is such a broad degree, whether it's accredited or
Mhm.
not, that it sets you up for a really good foundation to just be a good problem solver.
Yeah, sure.
I do feel that anyone working in the profession, it should be licensed. I also
Okay.
do feel that there's a huge roadblock allowing that to happen.
Mhm.
I don't think it should take even the average, whatever NCARB says it is now, 3, 4, 5, 6 years after graduation that someone's licensed, average. I think it should be more along the lines of law, medical, that you come out of school, you do your bar, you do your residency, you're licensed. It's shortly
Mhm.
thereafter that you are licensed. And I know other countries handle it differently. Just because you graduate,
Mhm.
you're now licensed, and
Yep.
maybe that's a solution, maybe it's not. But IPAL might be a way to get us there, but I don't think IPAL is right for everybody.
No.
Because there's half the students that we go to school with that end up, I say half. Someone can correct me on the actual number, but not everybody that graduates from an architecture program goes into the profession to practice architecture, and I think
Right.
that's okay.
So back to the leaky pipe in the
Yeah.
pipeline.
Hmm.
I've actually seen it as kind of a good thing that there's people who find a value in architecture who are infiltrating other fields with this
Yes.
mindset, with this training, and that generationally, as they
Yes.
grow in their leadership positions in these adjacent industries, in these adjacent materials, companies, all these other things, that they are growing in that leadership sense with this value of architecture, whether or not they themselves became architects.
Yep. I fully support the leaky pipe. Not in my house. I hate them. I'm dealing with them. But the leaky pipe, and I'm going to pick on a good friend of mine in just a hot minute here, on why the leaky pipe is really important for policy. I do think there's a challenge that we still have in filling the pipeline,
Hmm.
in letting all of society know that the practice of architecture exists. The leaky pipe is great. We want people who understand what architecture is to be our clients. We want them to be on the developer side. We want them to be on the contractor side. We want them to be on the public sector side. We want them to be advocates for good design and important design. And you learn all that in school. You learn the importance of designing for community. So whether or not you go and get your license or not, I think we want people educated in architecture in society. Leaky Pike example, Jacob Day. I now have to call him Secretary Jacob Day, but never to his face. He was a classmate. He was a classmate of mine. We went through AIS together. He was AIS president in 04, 05 when I was a national quad director. Graduated University of Maryland. He went on, and I don't know, he got like 3 or 4 different master's degrees, and he's in the Army, and he starts to build his resume towards policy and uh, politics. He becomes mayor of Salisbury. He does a great job as mayor of Salisbury. He's now the Secretary of Housing for the state of Maryland. And it's a great success story on why the leaky pipe works. Like, wouldn't you want the Secretary of Housing in your state to be someone who's trained in architecture? I'm pretty happy with it. As a resident of the state of Maryland, I feel like he can make more informed decisions as someone who understands the policies and practices that go into good design. And he's knowledgeable enough to know if something that's put on the table is, worthwhile or not. And at this point, he's kind of dealt with enough of the politics behind things and the red tape that he understands where some of those sticky situations are. But you can't pull a quick one by him because he's too informed in that sense. So and you can multiply that, 10 times over, right? Like to have architects to advocate on your church board when you have a renovation going on, someone who's at least been educated or trained in architecture to be talking about future development of your community.
Yeah, I think the leaky pipe theory, that's our new theory here. Where I am in this moment in time in my career, my focus is built environment. So it's not just architecture, it's everything. That's the summit, this conference that I'm at right now. I'm going to MC the next few days. And so in my world right now, there's this intense focus that's on innovation and changing how we work, and all these different aspects of quote unquote built environments. It's broader than the architecture office per se. And so yeah, there's absolutely we need lots of leaky pipe. The incubator cohort that I'm running right now, I think all of the startup founders but one have a background in architecture, and they're developing software, and they're developing all these different solutions that impact the profession and beyond. I think one of the reasons to ask the question about licensure is also accessibility. When again, I think the example that's almost always pointed to is the doctor's office. I go to the doctor's office and I encounter 12 people from the time I walk in the door till the time I walk out of the door, and only one of them is right. That's an actual MD. We have nurse practitioners and radiologists and whatever all those roles are. And so, that's often equated to the profession of architecture. Well, you've got people that are doing Revit, and you've got people that are writing specifications, and you've got people, whatever and whatever and whatever and whatever. So then the question is, well, and I asked my undergrads this last semester. I haven't asked this semester yet, but what do you want to do? And very few of them, and this actually surprised me a little bit. It's like 75% of them were not that interested in the traditional role of architecture. What are you interested in, right? And some of them building envelope designs, and a lot of them have mad digital skills, so that renderings and the other visualization tools and things like that. But and again, they're undergrads. They're 4 years into their education, so they're still figuring it out. I guess I would argue that many of us are still figuring it out a whole lot of years after we've graduated. But I was surprised at how they're looking at niches and how they're looking at these different specific roles that are within the profession, even in the offices, in an architecture office many times, but not as interested in whatever a traditional role of architecture is. I guess that question too is, what is a traditional architecture role? But does it make sense to walk into an architecture office and say, hey, like when I worked at large firms, there's one person in the office stamping plans, right? There's only, we can get into risk management and all of that, right? But there's one person stamping. So does everybody in the office really need to be licensed, or is there an opportunity for somebody that that has an interest in construction that says, hey, I can work on the CA side, or I can I can write specifications or whatever without having to go through the licensure process, take on debt, et cetera. I mean, it's a big ball, as you've already identified, but that's why I think that one of the reasons I think that question is important, because is it an issue of access to the profession, understanding limitations, but can we get to the profession without having to Erica's talking about, and Scott also, right? BRC 90. I look at students now having one in college and one that's headed to college that are going to places that cost $72,000 a year for what? Right? If I go to a school and pay $72,000 a year and I graduate with a BARC or an MARC, right? The numbers, that's $250,000. Easy, quick math. What's Clint Evans going to pay me?
Right.
How do I ever pay off $250,000, let alone time for studying, et cetera?
Yeah.
I obviously there's a lot of questions there. I don't
Yeah.
even know what the question is, but
well, I think part of this, and I'm reading Erica's comment here as well. I feel that part of this gets to the question of licensure, and why was I so abrupt to say that I think that everybody in the profession, once you're practicing in the profession, should have a license? I don't think it's the person that's actually stamping the drawings. I don't know how that ever changes. I mean, I feel like every office does it a little bit differently. We do it where all principals in charge stamp. So it's not one person, but it's the principal in charge. But it's still like takes you years to get to that position. They actually at least oversee the work, which I feel better about than other offices I've been in where it's like, who are you? But you're stamping this. Okay. So the reason I feel that you should be licensed is so that you can, I feel that it shouldn't be what is currently the hurdle to get to licensure. So let me kind of back that off, because I think that from an equity standpoint, from a cost of education and getting to that point, you start to very quickly limit who in society you're going to be able to reach, right?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I think it's important because when we're put in front of clients and community, that we can show that we are a professional doing this work.
Yeah.
And you can call upon us because we are qualified to do this work. So that's where I come from that. In smaller firms, and Katie, you can probably speak to this, but my experience in smaller firms, like that is where I would say is you're doing little bits of everything, both project types as well as like what you're doing on a project. You're doing the bathroom details, you're doing the sections, the specs, you're doing it all. You're doing the marketing. And once you get into larger firms, you start to become specialized in pieces. And you're the envelope person, or you're the masonry, or I'm the site person. And so I start to address site comments. And you as you do that, you learn more and you develop more of that skill set. Don't ask me to put a window detail together. My buildings are going to leak. I'll admit it. My colleagues got that covered.
Frank Lloyd Wright's.
So, but I'm not going to be asked to look at those specs in any great detail. And I'm not going to be asked to look at those details in any great detail. My colleagues have that covered. But when it comes to the site and the civil and geothermal and that type of coordination, then I have it covered. And I feel very capable and competent in that regards. So I think because of the specialty, that's where there's opportunities for professional advancement. Like, I don't know, you talk about being 18. You want to be a spec writer the rest of your life? Like, what is spec writing? Or do you want to do contracts the rest of your life? Do you want to do contracts for an architecture firm? Like, where is this at the career fair, right? And so I think these are positions that people fall into because, one, they've developed a specialty towards it, and two, they have interest in it. Personally, I have developed interest and a bit of a rapport in contracts and negotiate. Who the heck, I'm not a lawyer, but like I know just enough to, I don't even want to say like be lethal, but like, I know just enough to like have a good position at the table. And at this point, I've had enough experience where it's not my first time, where you just feel like Bambi on ice your first time. You're just like, I don't feel comfortable at all. And then you get into it a few times. Well, guess what? Every small firm owner does their contracts, right? Like Katie does her own contracts. I'm sure of it, right? Like you have to. You get into a big firm, you don't have to do contracts anymore because that's somebody else's job. And so, or specs is another prime example. Like, when did we even develop spec writers? But there are like certain firms that do a really good job with spec writing, but they
Hmm.
don't know much about the project because they're not actually working on it. And they like interview you to learn about the
Yep.
project. And then they write a really good spec that holds up in the court of law and covers you during CA. So there's a there's a benefit to that. And again, this is where I'm saying, like, from a professional standpoint, I feel like that it's important to be able to say, like, no, I'm a qualified person that should be doing this work, as opposed to someone who might just be interested, someone that doesn't have any education and that doesn't have
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
only has experience. There's ways to get there, and NCARB, continues to support that, but it's a much bigger, loops to have to jump through to just show it through experience.
It's
The sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's like swimming in an ocean though. Once you get past the name architecture, like you learn about all of these things, and we talk about that K through 12 pipeline that we started with. It's so hard to communicate that. So just like meeting one architect, that doesn't represent even like 1% of what architects do when you only meet one person. If they describe their day to day, it's so challenging to explain it. I feel like engineers have done a bit better of a job. There's some great personalities on YouTube like Mark Rober and Smarter Every Day who are like former NASA engineers now making it accessible to children, and they're engaging them in that problem solving that I think is really elevating engineering a lot. There's the whole STEAM and STEM movement that
Hmm.
architects missed out on somehow. But I think we, like, for going back to that K through 12, like that start of the pipeline, what are some thoughts or ideas about how each of us can be kind of growing the profession or growing awareness at this young age?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. You've recognized the problem. How do you fix it? Right? So
Right?
and I don't know if this is the solution, but I think it's part of the solution. And maybe this is how, Jeff, I'll tie it back to Christopher Kelley.
Yeah.
So the reason that the Christopher Kelley Leadership Development Program, in my humble opinion, is so successful, it's now got 12 chapters throughout the country. For those of you on the West Coast, Silicon Valley's applications are currently open, AIA. Uh, the there's over 800 alumni over 10 years now, and like, this is leadership development for young architects, emerging professionals, to just learn the basics about firm leadership and institute professional leadership and civic and community leadership, just like the 101, how to be a good leader. We all have it in us. The reason it's successful is because it's a grassroots movement. AIA National, again, a couple weeks ago, Ryan, would you be interested in making this an AIA National program? No, because then it's going to cost 3 times as much. I say it jokingly, but it's probably true. And it's going to become it's going to come down from this like mothership approach, and it's going to be forced. And it's in 3 years, it's not going to be a program anymore. The reason the program works so well is because it's grassroots bottom up. And I'm a big fan of grassroots bottom up. If we can infiltrate that into the US government, I think we'd be in a great position. But how do we fix the pipeline in the profession? From a grassroots movement. And this is where myself and all of us as folks in the profession, don't let another K through 12 student go by without talking to them about the profession. It can be 30 seconds. Have you thought about architecture? At my wife's cousin's family reunion thing that we did in Florida, the son of one of them thought about engineering. So we were shooting hoops. He was shooting a lot better than I was, out in the park, talking to him about the profession. He was really interested in one school because that's where his parents went. So there's more than one school. We had a conversation about it. You know, he's since reached back out and asked for more information. He wanted to go into engineering. And I'm not saying you got to go into architecture, and I don't know that he will. But he at least now is informed that architecture even exists, because he just thought engineering was what gets things built. And his reason was because it was going to, make financial matters that much better. And I was like, well, maybe and maybe not. Like, you can make a living, but don't do it for that reason, because you're not going to enjoy the rest of your life if that's the only reason you're doing it. So I think if each of us can, talk to those students, and and it certainly creeps into college students as well, but I think particularly the K through 12 students, open our doors for shadow days, for shadow weeks. And I I of all people know like how much time goes into hosting those people. Like, it's not, let me just swing it and make it happen to make it an enjoyable experience. And who can I pawn this off on? But maybe you can pawn it off on somebody else in your office. But at least like give them an hour,
Mhm.
because in 30 to 60 minutes you can get a lot out that just gives them enough crumbles to follow. I wish I had 30 to 60 minutes of somebody telling me about accreditation and telling me about licensure at the very least. I learned about what an architect did. I had a shadow day as well, Katie, similar experience. But it was so like, oh, every day is different.
Yeah.
Um, and I just wish that instead of the every day is different on a job site for some rich person's third home, that it could have been 30 minutes just talking about, here's some resources to look into.
I think I've loved what our architecture and schools committee has done locally, like being available to do things for Girl Scout or Boy Scout troops. And they have an activity of here's something you can build in cardboard. I know my own kids, when we moved, I gave them just like 10 boxes and they built something, and maybe scissors too early. But it's fun to just give them space to create
Yeah.
and explore. But I also see it in schools and at county fairs. If your AIA component has a fair at a county booth, um, it's a great way to like bring models or bring something to reach different parts of the population
Yeah. That's a
and,
great
and grow
idea.
that awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that grassroots is right on. There will be some that will watch this. Maybe we're watching now. Maybe we're watching or listening later that will complain about AIA. And this is not an AIA commercial, nor is it AIA bashing, but that isn't going to do it, right? You think about K-12. Take middle schoolers, just cut it right in the middle and go, we're going to talk to middle schoolers. How many middle schoolers want to hear from a big organization about anything? Not a single one, right? They're going to run the other direction. And it's just like, and I hear this comment fairly often, oh, AIA ought to be doing more to talk about the value of architects. And I've heard people say, oh, AIA ought to be putting together case studies that I can use for my marketing. And this is a tangent, but seriously, you want to give a potential client a case put together by a national organization instead of one that's your own project and your own client? That isn't going to work. That's not what you want at all. You have to take responsibility for your work and your marketing and your clients, and that's different. But I think also when it comes to taking the message, we've done a horrible job as a profession of telling the story. It's a complicated story, right? And also, so I'm a block from I'm 2 blocks from Georgia Tech's incubator over here, and so I'm surrounded by these like uber smart engineers and stuff. Um, I also know that many of them, when they say engineer, somebody thinks they've got this picture of an engineer. It's like, oh no, I'm a different kind of engineer. They've
Mhm.
got something similar going on, right? But there is, I think, a more cohesive story about what engineers do. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think we need to be telling the story better, and I think we also need to be talking a lot more. Maybe wrapping this back to the impact on society, right? If I'm in this neighborhood, what's an architect on this neighborhood? Has there ever been an impact of an architect on this neighborhood? What could an architect do in this neighborhood? And like you said, Ryan, that might be something to do with the ground, right? It might be something to do with site. It might be something that's vertical. Who knows, right? It might be zoning, which probably we use the term zoning. We should use something more understandable, more relatable. But I think it does come down to some personal responsibility for all of us. You're Scott's talking about the merit badge in Boy Scouts example, right? It's going to take everybody, being able to tell their individual story, and your path, right? How in the world? I love the ACE mentorship program because I know about it because it was in my kids' school. Neither one of them is even leaning towards architecture, which is perfectly fine. But I do know the impact that ACE has in their high school, and it's similar to what you've been talking about. We need people in the schools, um, opening kids' eyes to the fact that this exists and is possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other questions there, as are a lot have been identified in the comments and in our conversation. But I agree with you. I think it starts down there.
I love Jessica saying the spark. When you find your spark for architecture, that really resonates.
Yep.
I think also, Ryan, when you start to talk about those different professions within the profession, these different channels of expertise, whether it's technical or management or marketing or business or architecture, just doing a good drawing set, building an awareness of that instead of like a traditional pyramid king of the hill sort of got to make it to the top. I think that will also help broaden and strengthen the profession because it elevates different skill sets that different people bring from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, why I think the degree is so helpful, that it, like, you could make a firm out of a cohort of students at a program, right? Like, they're diverse enough that you're going to have one that really rises as a designer, one that really does well technically, one that is really interested in the business side of things. And that's why I think that leaky pipeline's good. Let them out, let them go. But it's also, part of, how the education provides a really broad problem solving degree.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I think I tell my students that there's basically three valuable things for school, and a couple of them you could argue are similar or the same. But one is critical thinking, one is design thinking, and I mean, it all kind of feeds into what you're saying, into problem solving, and you can do a lot of things, and it's cliche, but you can change the world. We need more of that. Whether it is in architecture or it's in politics or it's in whatever. I get excited when students are thinking broader than traditional architecture, because I know, right, it's these things that we complain about, on the architecture side. Think of the impact think of how that could change if someone with this, like you were saying, the Secretary of Housing, think about how that could change if someone with this education went out and was working it from the other side. Erica was talking about being on the client side. She had different comments about that, and the reality, the cost and the earning on the client side, which we'll just have to have another one of these conversations to address some of those. But Ryan, I really appreciate you coming and talking about this pipeline problem, and we need to keep talking about it and working towards a solution to it. As I can report, I've seen articles about this, and I know the impact of it at Ball State, where I teach. Class sizes are getting larger. The four classes that are in the school, the College of Architecture and Planning at Ball State right now, are subsequently larger. So they are getting larger. Now, where those students go, who knows? But we are seeing, at least right now, an influx of students in one school. I don't know if that's, I've read articles that say it's beyond one school, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
We've only scratched the surface.
Great to have you here. Yeah.
It's been good. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And
yeah, not one jab at the mustache.
That was you. That was all you.
Yeah.
It would have been a boring drinking game.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we stayed sober. That's probably a good. But yeah, Ryan, I appreciate you coming again. Thanks for everything that you do. Not only these conversations, but with CKLDP and everything else that you're involved in. You're truly making a difference, and that's reflected in a lot of the recognition that you have received, being effed and whatnot. But had to get it in there. Um, but yeah, thanks for joining us. And I think we need to have you back because there are even just on this one topic, there are different directions to take this conversation. Certainly, this is a big one, big yarn to unravel here. So thanks for doing this, and to all of you that are out there in the audience, either live now or in some time shifted manner. Thanks for listening. Let us know what you think about these conversations. I know right out of the bat we saw, or right out of the gate, we saw people saying this is a conversation that needs to happen. So thank you for that. Share this wherever you're listening to it, watching it, whatever. Right now, share it so other people can get involved in this conversation. And we'll be back again next week, 2 p.m. Eastern, on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, with our next conversation of Context and Clarity Live. We're getting close now. We're October. We've probably got 3 or 4 more weeks, I guess, left in this this fall season of Context and Clarity Live. So thanks for being here. Again, thanks Ryan, thanks Katie, thanks to all of you, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks everybody.